Hey guys, Effie here. Today I'm going to make this card using our new Coming Up Poinsettias stamp set. I'm also going to use our tone squares for the background and you'll see me stamp that later. Now I'm just going to start off by white heat embossing this beautiful poinsettia cluster image from the stamp set onto some watercolor paper, and then I'm just going to pour on some white embossing powder. Now if you get some stray powders, just use a small tip paintbrush to just brush away those excess powders. Then I took my heat tool and hit the whole panel with my heat gun, melting all of that beautiful powder. Now I'm going to start watercoloring, and I'm using my Ken Oliver Colorburst. I'll be using the Alizarin Crimson first. This is the first shade that I'll use. Actually, it's the only shade that I'll use for the petals. And I'll just use a couple of green hues for the actual leaves. Now I'm going to be doing some wet and wet watercoloring. So I wet the area of one petal first with clean water, and then I took my brush, I dipped it into the alizarin crimson powder pan, and I just started dropping in bits of color into the inner corners or portions of the petals. Then I took a second clean brush and I pulled that color out a little bit just towards the edges of the petals. And this way I get a really nice blend. Now, I found that I have too much of a blend going on, and I wanted some areas of my petals to be a little bit more concentrated in color for more interest. So I just go back and I add a little bit more of the alizarin crimson to certain areas of the petals. So I want the inner areas of the petals to be a little bit more darker, and also the areas or petals that are in the background. So the foreground petals are going to be a little lighter, so I'll just add a little bit more of a concentration of the powder to the curve of that line of the foreground petals. And this way you're going to get a little more of an illusion of depth to your painting. And you can see that you get a really beautiful stained glass kind of effect when you paint this way over white heat embossed images. And I'm really in love with this effect, and you're going to see me use this technique more in the future. I'm almost finished painting here, but I did go back and rework that first poinsettia because I thought it was a little too light. So I just add a little bit more of the alizarin crimson just to make that flower pop just a little bit more. So now that I'm done painting the petals and the blooms, I'm going to go ahead and start painting the stems and leaves. I'll be using a little bit of Terre color burst, and after I applied that, it was just, I wasn't a fan. I wanted something a little darker, so I went in and I added some sap green, and I really liked the brightness of this. Sap green is kind of my go-to for my foliage and other greens. But then after I blended the sap green out just a little bit, I wanted a little bit more of a darker green, so I added some lime green color burst to the leaves and just blended it out a little bit in each section of the leaves, and this kind of gave the painting a little bit more interest because now I have some nice concentrated dark areas and some light areas as well. Once I finished painting the panel, I set it aside to dry while I stamped my pattern background. So I'm using our tone squares. This is a 6x8 clear set, and I'm going to start off by stamping the first layer of my pattern in our soft garnet dye ink. Then I'll take the second stamp and I'll stamp this one in our soft garden dye ink. I went for a Christmas color palette, even though the soft garnet, it's the mid-tone red in our Ruby collection inks. While it is a little pink, it still has that red undertone, and I wanted a more softer background. I didn't want to go for that candy apple red. I wanted something a little softer for the background of my card. For the third layer of my tone squares, I'm going to just heat emboss that with some gold glitter embossing powder. Since this is glitter embossing powder, I heat the panel from behind so that the glitter doesn't go flying everywhere. This way, most of that glitter stays right on your project. Trying to use these stamps, when you get them in the package, you want to use the cluster that's on the left side first, then stamp the second one, which is the one on the right side, and then the third stamp is the one that is lying horizontal at the top of the set. So that's the order that you want to stamp these stamps in. So once I finish with the left side of my pattern, I'm going to go ahead and stamp all three stamps the same way, but on the right side of my panel. And now you get this really beautiful tri-colored background that's really versatile, and it works with a lot of images, not just florals. Next, I'm going to die cut my poinsettias using the coordinating die. After I place the die cut side down onto my painted image, I'm going to tape it down with some Thermoweb purple tape, and then I'm going to place my panel cut side up, or up, the image is going to be upside down in my sandwich, and I ran the whole thing through my die cutting machine. Now you can see me kind of being a little indecisive as I try to figure out the placement of my poinsettias, and it was just a little too busy for me, and I really considered stamping a new Tone Squares panel with grays, but I wanted to make this work, and to do so I die cut the poinsettia clusters die a few more times, and I applied or adhered it right behind the painted clusters. But when I adhered it down, I just made sure to offset it a little bit so that the cluster would have this white outline. And I thought that this would tone down the project. And I was actually really happy with the results, but I wanted there to be a little bit more dimension. So I die cut the die two more times, glued them together, those last two die cuts, and then I glued down the painted piece over, but again, I offset it just a little bit more. So I have a lot of layers going on behind this. And because there was some white space happening behind that cluster, it just really did a good job of toning down the busyness. Next, I took the largest die from our double stitch rectangle small die collection, and I die cut my pattern panel, and this is going to cut it to a size that's a little smaller than an A2 size panel, while adding stitching to the edges at the same time. Then I adhered it onto a side folding A2 card base. Next, I decided to pop up my poinsettia cluster onto my card using additional foam tape. I could have just adhered it down with some regular glue or adhesive, but I wanted there to be a little bit more dimension, and you kind of have this drop shadow effect going on because of that dimensional foam tape, and that also serves as a great way to differentiate that cluster from the background. Next, I stamped the sentiment, and this is from our Coming Up Poinsettias, and I wanted the sentiment strip to come off more off of my project. So on the right side, I have 3 layers of foam tape and 1 layer of foam tape on the left side because that left side is going to go over the poinsettia, so you don't need as much foam tape. And then I just mounted it onto my card. Lastly, I'm just going to add a little bit of our gold medallion sequins to finalize my card, and I'm going to create some visual triangles. Once I'm done with the placement of my sequins, I'm just going to adhere them down using some Ranger Multi-Matte Medium. And I just use my precision tweezers to apply the sequins. Now my card is complete. I hope you all enjoyed today's video. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel because I update it on a weekly basis. Thanks so much for watching, guys. I'll see you next time.